G'day members and anyone associated with the Property Investors Council of Australia. I'm Ben Kingsley, the chair of the association, representing the interests of property investors and obviously advocating for those interests. Now, just last week, an article caught my eye from Yahoo Finance, and that article was telling a horror story in relation to an experience that an investor had in the Victorian property market. And that inspired me to actually reach out to that particular investor, whose name is Dan Yeats, and have a conversation with Dan about his experience. And I asked him, would he be happy to share that experience? Because I started to dig a little bit deeper into this particular story. And this is the unintended consequences when you get the imbalance wrong between landlords, owners of the properties who are providing private rental accommodation, and also tenant powers, and then what happens from an administrative point of view when it all goes wrong. So we're going to tell Dan's story, and the first way we're going to do that is Dan also appeared on A Current Affair some weeks back, and I think A Current Affair does a wonderful job in capturing just the situation that Dan faced himself in. So let's cut to that video now, and then we'll pick up the story after our friends at A Current Affair has provided this information. So let's go to that story now.
Hello, I'm Deb Knight. Welcome to A Current Affair. When Daniel bought an investment property, he thought it would be a smart decision to help secure his family's future. He welcomed in a mum and her two daughters. On the face of it, ideal tenants. Instead, they stopped paying rent almost immediately, turning his dream into a house of horrors.
Inside Daniel's house of horrors.
As you can see, the rooms are just a cesspit. Drug paraphernalia.
The smell is intense.
Tenants from hell who turned his home into a garbage dump.
How does it feel seeing your house treated like this?
Yeah, disgusted, obviously.
And legal loopholes that allowed them to live rent-free.
In Victoria, if you're a landlord, you're the bad guy already.
Daniel Yeats purchased an investment property in the northern suburbs of Melbourne in October 2024, and soon after, he says his nightmare began.
It was within a month or so, rent stopped coming. I thought, once that lease ran out, well, then that was it. I wasn't going to renew it.
But even when the lease expired, his renters refused to leave. Daniel's been trying to evict the family, a mother and two daughters, for more than a year, but he's been hitting roadblock after roadblock with VCAT.
Hello, Brennan Crew from A Current Affair.
Before the family were evicted, we paid them a visit. They were home, but refused to talk to us.
I believe we've gone to the tribunal 13, 14 times. I've lost track. And each time we'd get a finding for us where we'd get possession, but then they'd appeal it. At the appeal, then they'd find like an admin issue, like a wrong email, and then it'd get thrown back to us. And then we'd have to start the whole process over again. I hear about it all the time.
He was finally given the green light to bring in authorities, but at the 11th hour,
I've received a phone call from VCAT saying that the order has been appealed. We're back to square one, basically.
Daniel claims he's owed tens of thousands of dollars in rent and thousands more in legal fees. He's been forced to get a FIFO job away from his family to make ends meet.
How does it feel being so close to your property and not being allowed to take it back after all these months?
Exceptionally frustrating. The anger, I go through, periods of time where my anger gets the better of me and all that kind of stuff. So
just how could they get away with this?
Yeah, exactly. And why are we encouraging it? It doesn't benefit anyone, really.
It's very difficult in Victoria to be a landlord in 2026.
Property lawyer Justin Lawrence from Henderson and Ball.
It's absolutely crucial that every landlord totally vets their prospective tenant. References, checks, employment history, even bank statements.
He says in Victoria, the laws are swayed in favour of the tenants.
I think the starting point for most laws across Australia is that they should be fair. If you're a tenant and you don't pay rent, you should be evicted.
Finally, 2 days after the latest appeal, the orders came through and the tenants were evicted last month.
So Daniel, you finally got the keys to your own house. How does it feel?
It's a relief, exceptional relief, and obviously I've been able to tell my wife that, and
It's been such a long, drawn-out ordeal. I can only imagine it must be a weight lifted off your shoulders.
Exactly. As you can see, because there was like 14 cats in there, they've just been allowed to defecate everywhere. There's maggots everywhere.
Each room worse than the last.
I'm sure it comes as no surprise, but the smell in this house is unbelievably bad. It makes you wonder how anyone can live like this.
Daniel will now have to pay for the house to be cleaned and repaired, which is estimated to cost tens of thousands of dollars. He says it's not covered by rental insurance.
I don't hold any hope that I'll get that money back. It's going to cost me more money to try and get it, and then if they claim that they don't have the money, I just don't see how I could possibly get it.
Daniel says something's got to give.
Stricter enforcement with rental payments. If they're not paying rent and it just keeps accruing, they need to just remove them at that point. You need to change these systems in place at the moment. It's not right.
Imagine treating someone's home like that, let alone living that way. The Victorian government says the state has the strongest laws in the country designed to balance the rights of renters and landlords. And still, something like this can happen. Something does have to change.
So, Dan, when you obviously watch that story back, how does it make you feel?
Brings back a lot of memories back from that time. So it went on for months. Obviously, it was over 13 months before we got them out. So at first, I thought it was going to be a little process and all that kind of stuff, and then we'd get them out. Like when I was looking on the VCAT paperwork and all that, after 14 days, you can start the arrears process. I figured you'd be able to remove them after a certain point, but even after we put them on a management plan back in March, I think it was, which they stopped paying pretty much soon after. I think we got a $20 payment at one point. It started to get quite frustrating. And then I noticed that this seemed to be going on a lot longer. I read a couple of articles about other people experiencing similar things, and I saw one case that went for over 15 months. I started to panic a little bit then. So yeah.
What I mean, in terms of, obviously there's an enormous amount of pressure and frustration and emotional attachment to it, but what was the sort of overriding feeling when you're looking at the legislation and you're following the process, you're doing the right thing, but you've really got no means by which to accelerate it on?
Yeah, it was it honestly felt hopeless. Like I was trusting the second real estate agent that I got in to take over. So, and she was doing her best. I think she tried her best. But VCAT, she'd get one hearing that would find in our favor, and then pretty much immediately after they put in an appeal, and then we're back to square one with that. So it got really hopeless there for a while. And
so off the back of that, you've decided to not let it sit. You've actually decided to take action, and you've done that in the spirit of helping potentially every other investor and private rental accommodation provider in Victoria by setting about wanting to change the laws. Because in terms of what position did you find yourself in off the back of the changes that were made in 2021, when you were looking up at the legislation and so forth? What changed that put the power into the tenants' hands as opposed to the owners' hands?
I believe it was the Dan Andrews government back in 21. They enacted a reasonable and proportionate framework. That was what I was told has caused a lot of the imbalances that are occurring at the moment.
And in terms of how much financially do you think you're out of pocket overall?
Rental arrears by the end of the tenancy, when we finally got them out, was a bit over $27,000. Then there was, I had to engage a lawyer. The property manager basically said, look, these people know what they're doing. This is going to continue.
They're gaming
you
the
need
system.
specialist help. That was $680 an hour, with no guarantees that it'd be any certain amount of hours. So
then there's the property repairs and everything else to get the property back into a lettable order.
So it was almost $12,000 in lawyer fees. Then it was about $10,000 to remove all of the belongings that were there. And now I'm in the process of trying to find money to pay for the removing the floors and the carpets
repairs,
and all that kind of stuff, because they've wrecked all of it. And then so that's it.
So your estimate is how much? How much do you reckon it's going to
potentially 30 to 40,000 to remove and replace all the floors, and then to paint the property.
So that's total of around sort of $70,000 to $80,000 if I'm doing my mental math. Right. So in terms of what you're doing about it, because you've gone through a process where you had to go through VCAT 13 to 14 times, and again they gamified the system and looked for loopholes. They obviously weren't legitimately. I mean, I call them un-Australian, right? At the end of the day, they've stolen from you. They've taken free accommodation, and they've effectively stolen from you. So tell us, what you've done since then to start a campaign where we can get this legislation adjusted.
So I wanted to start like a campaign to basically get the Victorian government to see what I went through and what other people have gone through. There wasn't really any way of doing that. I reached out to the Victorian government, and I basically got a message back from Nick Stakos basically saying, sorry for what's happened to you. We'll look into it.
Yeah, so just for that point, the context of who Nick is the Minister for Consumer Affairs. Is that correct? And you just got I'm sorry, but
pretty much it was
nothing.
Sorry,
but I can't do anything about it. When he can do something about it, right? Like he ultimately is the minister. He can absolutely do something about these situations where it's clearly unfair, and it's clear in terms of where the bias lives in terms of the current legislation. So you mentioned something on the news story there around what you're hoping for in regards to the changes to the process that would hopefully, again, level the playing field just that little bit in respect of getting action happening sooner rather than later.
Yeah, so I started a petition. With that petition, I managed to, that was done initially through Change, and that got me a little bit more media attention and all that kind of stuff, which was good. That's how Nick from Yahoo got on board and started reaching out to me. Basically explained to him the things that I think were important. First and foremost is rent. Like if rent's not being paid, I don't see how these constant appeals should be allowed. So I think a process should be put in place that if they want to appeal a VCAT order or like a possession order, well then rent has to be paid up. At the moment I'm hearing, and I've been speaking with certain people, they're getting put on plans of like $5, $10 and all that kind of stuff. That take years and years to pay back. So I've had to pay for pretty much their rent and my mortgage.
And your
on top of
rising costs, right, of interest
all
rates
of the
are
other
going
fees
up.
that come, the land rates and all that kind of stuff, the water bills, everything. So it's just not fair. I rented up until I was 35 when we bought our first property, and I never missed a rent payment. So I just didn't think it was a thing as well.
Well, and I think that's really important that, obviously as the chair of the PICA Association, we want all tenants to have safe and quiet enjoyment of the properties that are contractually negotiated with them. And we think that maybe 90 to 95% of people do the right thing. It's just this 5%, and I'll also say that potentially for some landlords as well, that don't necessarily respect the rights of the tenant in regards to safe and quiet enjoyment. But what we're talking about here is an excessive situation where the laws and the systems are breaking down, and we're seeing that broken down in multiple areas. So since the Labor government introduced 133 reforms, of which some of them were well received by both parties, but others certainly put the balance of power back into the tenants' hands. We've seen an explosion of the number of complaints that are being handled by VCAT. In fact, so many that we now have a special dedicated team of people, mediators, to mediate those relationships. So we always said the problem with, not getting the balance right in the reform is you're going to create more bureaucracy. And we've seen, like, if you just have a look at the Administrative Tribunal generally, the Civic and Administrative Tribunal of Victoria, it's in a state of mess. We've seen managers and leaders of that business rotate through. The whole thing is failing off the back of, especially in obviously the private rental property market side. And we're obviously worried that the government isn't doing anything about it. Now, I want to talk to, those balance of rights and so forth and those behavioural things. So if a tenant has paid or they've missed a series of rental payments and they go on to, you're saying that it's best that for them to be able to stay in their property, they need to pay their rent up to that time. Now, if they're in a financial difficult situation, that's understandable. But how long should that be the case? Like, ultimately, there's got to be a tipping point where it's clear that it's, they can't afford, to pay for the service that they're requiring, which is accommodation services. And so ultimately they can be moved on. Now, the irony here is in hotels and other places, they have more rights to move people on in short stay, but yet we don't have those same rights as providing long-term stay, which is essential for any city or town to function, is to have rental accommodation availability. So take us through again in terms of what, if you were able to redesign the rules, what are some of the things you're looking to see happen?
So first and foremost, rental payments, obviously. I agreed and I was happy to work with them to pay what they were owed before at the start. And obviously we went through the whole payment plan thing. But I think it needs to be, after about a month, if they're still behind on rent and all that kind of stuff, well then, the government has to take over at that point. Maybe they can start paying the landlords the rent that's owed, because we become like a pseudo housing commission support, which I don't think is fair.
So you've taken your story to one of the members of Parliament, and you've got some support from that member of Parliament. Can you just take us through the conversations you've had with that opposition minister?
I reached out. I didn't like the response that I got from Nick Stakos. So it was about a month later, I think he ended up releasing another set of rules that he was going to be putting in place that further wrecked the balance, I felt. So I thought, okay, I'll try something else. And I reached out to opposition for Victoria, and I was
the housing spokesperson.
I was put in contact with Tim McCurdy, and he was really good. First person that actually spoke to me, reached out, and I had a good conversation with him, explained like what I'd gone through and all that kind of stuff, and then explained to him that I was going to try and do this government petition and I needed a sponsor. He agreed that he'd do that, which was good, and then that allowed me to get this other petition, the e-petition, in, which is going to be far more beneficial for everyone if it does get put to Parliament, which was my main goal, is just get the story out there and just make sure that people know what's going on and get some changes, some common sense changes put through.
Yeah. So Dan, we obviously, unfortunately, I only came to that story a little bit later. So that petition that you're talking about is the Legislative Assembly petition, which is the one that Tim is sponsoring for you. Now, the reason why this video is going out now, we're turning this around as quick as possible, is because that petition expires on the 1st of May. And we would love to get, anywhere between 5,000 and 10,000 signatures on that petition. Now, in addition to that petition, you also still have got the change.org petition, which is going to run longer. And I think it's also important to understand that the people who want to sign the Victorian petition need to actually reside in Victoria. So if you're an interstate investor, unfortunately, you don't get to sign the Victorian petition. I'll tell you what, how antiquated is that, like in terms of, 20th century, not 21st century. But so if you aren't a Victorian citizen, but you do feel strongly about this generally for obviously Dan's story, but also for the story for all private rental accommodation providers who are running their small businesses and feel like they're not being heard by governments, then this is the petition to get behind in change.org as well, to be able to get that message out there. And Dan, you're able to also potentially provide updates through that channel as well. So I know the first thing I did when I read the story, I jumped straight onto that petition and then I contacted you. And then I also jumped on the change.org petition and I put my details on both. So I would be encouraging anyone who's been moved by your story, or as we know, there are hundreds of others of these types of stories, but you've been strong enough, and brave enough to put a face to a real story that's happened to you, so others get some protections around what's happening here. So I want to obviously again recognise you and thank you for that. In terms of the final thing I want to talk about is psychologically, what has this sort of done for you in regards to having to manage through this? I mean, how's your wife and family sort of put up with this episode that's carried on for well over a year?
It's been exceptionally difficult. Obviously, I'm here at a mining site now, so I'm away from my family for long periods of time. My wife has had to basically take over full-time care of our kids for 2 weeks at a time as well. So that's been very challenging. It hasn't done wonders for my marriage, that's for sure. It's been pretty horrible, to say the least. So I've taken this role purely because I can save a lot more here than I can when I'm back home.
Earning a bit more and saving a bit more.
Right. Saving a lot more as well, because everything's provided for here. So, I don't have to worry about that side of things in regards to that. So it's allowed me to build up our money a little bit more than I could. I just felt like I was chasing my tail before. So,
yeah, makes sense. So I just want to, in closing, I just want to say a few important words, right? And this is for all of our members of the association. And if you're listening to this through other channels, such as the podcast that I'm the co-host of, or this video is being shared with you through other channels, there is serious problems here in Victoria. And it's why we've seen almost 25,000 rental accommodation stock reduction over the course of the last 24 months. So investors are voting with their feet. Now, that I might say, people might say, well, that's a good thing because it's making property more affordable. But for the 2/3 of people who own property in the state of Victoria, that's actually affecting the value of their properties. So those, if you just take a look at the value of property in Victoria compared to, or Melbourne, as an example, compared to, say, Brisbane or Perth or Adelaide and these other markets, there's tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars of unrealised value that's also been attributed to some of these reforms because they've really disincentivised investors to come into that market. Now, the other component of that, so that's everyone being affected, right, because it slows the economic flywheel down, the wealth effect and the like, is obviously there's a significant amount of rental stock that's been removed. So that means rents are going to be higher for people who are looking to rent in Victoria. So, we'll start to see even more rental increases because of the chronic rental supply. So let's recap. The process and delay is unsatisfactory, so we want VCAT to do something about that. The arrears threshold is unsatisfactory as part of that particular story. We do believe that there's a better balance that we can get between the rights of the owner and also the customer, which is the tenant, that agrees to a contractual relationship to enjoy safe and quiet accommodation in the properties that we put up for that. If we don't do that, and our properties are treated like social housing, or worse still, the government needs to find money to supply thousands upon thousands of additional social housing stock, that's going to cost tens of billions initially, and then hundreds of millions of dollars every year to actually administer and run that. So that's another unintended consequence we're going to see off the back of that. It's clear that, behaviourally, the actions of this mother and their daughters is completely unacceptable and I would consider un-Australian. Since when is it right for you to steal off a fellow Australian? Makes no sense to me. And really, that's the sign of the scenario that we're going to have where people think it's their human right to be able to steal off others and not provide any remuneration for that or any income for that is unacceptable. To obviously have that property condition in the state that it currently is in, which has caused you, as I said, between $30,000 and $40,000 of additional costs, is also completely unacceptable. And again, we've just heard about the psychological and financial loss that you've had to experience off the back of that. And so, these reforms need to be prioritised. And the best way to do that is obviously sign the petitions. And the other way to do that is if we don't see those reforms from this government because they're unwilling to act, then in the November election, we have another opportunity, and that is to vote them out of power so we can actually have, to Dan's point, ministers, members of parliament who are interested in readjusting the balance back to where it should be, as opposed to currently where it is. Dan, I'm going to give you the final word as we, close down this presentation and more of an interview, really. What would you like to say, to all of those people who are, we're effectively talking to future property investors, existing property investors. What's your message to them about the Victorian market and just generally in terms of what they, how they should think about their investing?
Definitely make sure that you get decent insurance in place. out of all the mistakes that I've made on this, that was the major one. I thought I was getting like decent insurance with what I had. I thought 5,000 in rental arrears was enough. That's a big mistake, because if you end up getting people like what I've experienced, it's going to go much longer and it's going to cost you way more. So I went for budget insurance and reap the benefit of that. So
let's just get with that. And look, I know off air we've also spoken about the poor experience you had with your initial property manager. So do you want to give another bit of advice around vetting your property manager?
When I first took out this property, we went through ARG and they accepted the mother and daughters, told me they were fantastic prospects, rental prospects, and it took me less than 2 minutes to read through the references that they supplied to realize they weren't. I was livid when I saw it, because I believed that they were the professionals, and who was I to tell them? So I accepted them on that behalf.
Yeah, so the advice that you get, you must get it from experienced professionals with good track records that have your best interests at heart. You've got, and if you do get a referral from one professional to another, it still shouldn't be an automatic. You should also still continue to do your vetting.
Exactly.
And we say that to all of our members, that it's just important to do that. Now, the business that referred you in, and we don't want to sort of necessarily mention any names here, but that they have been pretty good at supporting you in terms of, obviously, a property investment business that you went through. They've been supporting you on that journey.
It wasn't, because I actually removed the first property manager and took up another one, and they were really good. The second one that I got, they've helped me during it.
They were great, but again, they're not getting any income because you're not getting any rent.
They're getting paid.
So, at the end of the day,
but that's the way it is. Okay. And it's like, so make sure you get proper insurance as well. So and second guess them, and basically check over who they're going to put into the property. Check their references yourself personally. Don't trust that they've done their due diligence. You've got to make sure that they've done it. So,
some sage advice there, mate, and hopefully we can get a result for you in terms of getting the law changed. And if we do, we'll call it the Dan Yeats law, in terms of that we get. So, if you're watching this video, there will be some information usually below the video that will send you towards those two petitions. If you're watching this a little bit later than the 1st of May, then just the change.org petition will be there. The other one may not be accessible. Dan will obviously we'll pass on any feedback or anything else, for Dan being so brave in coming to tell his story. So if you want to, again, if you can find, if there's a comment section there, write to Dan, he'll read them. But if not, you can also, try and reach out to us through the Property Investment Council of Australia, which is obviously info@PICA, PICA.asn.au. We're a non-for-profit association representing the interests of landlords and property investors. So, we'd certainly pass on that feedback to Dan. And if there's any help that you want to give to Dan as well, we'll also pass that on as well. So, mate, thank you again for telling your very difficult story, and let's hope that we can get some momentum here and build on that, because we're going to be quite active in the lead up to this state election, because we do need to see some reform occur. We're just not sure that this government is willing to do that. So sounds like we need to change the government for that to happen. So that's what we'll be active in terms of doing. So thanks again for your time, mate. We really appreciate it.
Thank you. Can I just add, with the signing the Victorian petition, can you make sure you also share it? Signing it's great,
yes,
but sharing it yourself, also getting family members to sign it as well. We'll get those numbers up.
A great tip, and you'll see you'll see on there that you can forward it onto Facebook, Twitter, etc. It's at LinkedIn. So definitely start sharing that, which is what I started doing last night as we are recording on the Tuesday here. So starting to get that out there. But no, that's also great advice. Thank you very much, Dan. And we'll stay in touch, and hopefully we can help you when situations arise.
Thank you again for having me, Ben. It's appreciated.
Cheers, mate.
It's good talking to you.